Hello. I got married a few years ago, and I'm pregnant with my first child. I work as a wedding planner, but currently I'm on a temporary personal leave of absence. I have a dear friend whom I won't exchange for anything in this world. She's getting married soon and has asked me for my help since the wedding preparation is a lot harder. She apologized for overburdening me as I was pregnant, but I am so happy that I could be of some help to her. I told her not to think about anything else except her wedding. I explained my friend's wedding to my boss at work, and I became full in charge of her wedding. Actually, I had planned on taking a leave of absence since it hasn't been long before my pregnancy became stabilized. But I decided to take the leave after my friend is so dear to me because she was the only person who stood by me during my most difficult moments. Thus, even though we are not related, we have a solid tie. I am the sole daughter in my family, so I was able to monopolize the love of my parents and grew up without any lack of anything I wanted to eat or wear. Having a loving mother and a family-oriented father was the envy of anyone. But the happiness I thought would last forever disappeared in an instant. Perhaps our family's trouble had already been foreboding without my knowledge. I just didn't notice it. When I was 12 years old and in 6th grade, my mother passed away in a car accident. I was in school when my teacher called me out of the class separately. She said that she received a phone call from my dad that I had to go home immediately because of an urgent matter at home. At first, I was scared for a moment. I didn't know precisely what the matter was, but I sensed it must be something bad to have me come home early from school. When I got home, my maternal grandmother was waiting for me. As soon as I put down my backpack, she took my hand and led me out of the house. The place she took me was a big hospital. I asked my grandmother why we were at the hospital, but she didn't answer. When I saw her grim and pale face, I was able to guess somewhat. My grandmother did not enter the hospital side, but to the mortuary side. A stanza was set up in the hall, decorated with white chrysanthemums, and in the middle was a picture frame with a photo of my mother. Even though I was young, I was old enough to know the meaning. However, I just couldn't accept it. I grabbed my grandma, demanding why my mother's picture was there. When I asked her, my grandma slumped down on the floor, and her tears erupted that she was holding back and started to sob loudly. Then, my father came to me. He was suited in black with an armband to show that he was the head of the family of the deceased. Dad hugged me and stayed silent for a long time. Then he grabbed my shoulder tightly and said, "Alice, your mother had a car accident. It'll be hard, but we have to say farewell to your mother." I couldn't believe it. My mom, who served me breakfast just a few hours ago, died suddenly. It didn't feel real. It felt like she would just walk into the mortuary at any minute. I couldn't accept my mom's death. After the funeral service, when her coffin was placed in the crematorium, I screamed and cried, shouting that she didn't die. My father, my grandmother, and my relatives all looked on, feeling sorry for me. We placed my mother's ashes in the ossuary, and just my dad and I returned home. My mother was no longer at our home. It was just my dad and me. That night, my dad told me, "Alice, you have to live more bravely from now on, so that your mother can rest her mind in heaven and be happy." At that moment, I knew that the only person I could depend on was my dad. Time passed, and I graduated from elementary school and entered middle school. I still missed my mom terribly, but fortunately, I was less lonely because my dad and my grandma were by my side. However, another tragedy hit me again. Shortly after I entered middle school, my maternal grandmother passed away. She had a heart attack. People thought it was from the grief of losing her daughter. Ever since my grandmother passed away, I depended on my dad even more. The only person in the world who would take care of me was just my dad. But such thoughts were completely wrong. Shortly after my grandmother passed away, summer vacation had started. A few days later, my dad brought a strange woman home. She looked younger than my mom. "She's going to be your stepmother. Say hi." I was so shocked. It hadn't been a year yet since my mom passed away. A stepmother? How could my dad remarry so easily? It's a decision that I thought about for a long time. You're at the age who still needs a mother. Since she's a kind person, she'll take good care of you, Alice, my father said. He said as if he rushed into his remarriage because of me, but I couldn't believe him. I just felt betrayed by my dad. On the other hand, I wanted to understand my father. I felt it must have been hard for him to raise me without my mom. Just because my mom passed away, he didn't have to remain single for the rest of his life. If he wants to get remarried, I felt he should marry whom he wanted. So I swallowed my pain to accept it, but my efforts got thoroughly trampled on. It was a day that I came home earlier than usual. Just as I entered the front door, I heard a conversation between my dad and the stepmother. "Would your daughter listen to me? Fortunately, my kid hardly has any memories of her dad, so it should be okay with her. Alice should adjust well too. However, our lives seem like a drama. When my wife caught us, I thought then that my world had ended. But how is it that she dies from an auto accident?" "That's why your wife is so stupid. Since she has a child, she should have been more careful. How could she just speed away like that after discovering us in the car? It's no wonder she got into an accident. She threw away her own life." I became dazed, as if I had been hit with a hammer. Through their conversation, I found out that the shock caused my mother's death from witnessing my dad's having an affair with that woman behind my mom's back. I went straight into my dad's bedroom. When they saw me, they were startled as if they had seen a ghost. "Dad, you were the one who killed my mom. You killed her." Dad made excuses that it wasn't like that and offered to explain everything, but I didn't listen. "I don't want to hear your excuses. Don't plan on seeing me in the future. I don't care if you are my dad because I want to kill you all." I screamed and went to my room. Then I frantically packed my stuff into my luggage and left the house. My dad tried to stop me, begging me to hear what he had to say, but it was useless. My thoughts were full of just getting away from my dad. He seemed like a devil to me at that time. Of course, that woman was the same culprit who killed my mother. While I dragged my luggage wandering the street, the tears wouldn't stop the whole time. I felt so betrayed by my trusted father, and overwhelming pity for my mother, who had to die unfairly because of such a father. After walking for a long time, I saw a bus terminal. I had nowhere to go, so I just got on any bus. When the bus stopped at its last stop, I got off the bus to find myself in a strange city in a countryside. I felt so helpless at that moment. In my possession, I had about $20 in cash, a bus card, and a savings bank book, where I saved all my allowances and money for gifts, $2,000 in total. It was a large sum for my age, but it was not enough to start a life on my own. I dragged my luggage to a nearby 24-hour health spa. After spending a few days there, it dawned on me that I needed to spend money more carefully since I didn't know what would happen to me in the future. I left the 24-hour health spa and wandered about aimlessly. For meals, I bought cheap sandwiches at convenience stores. I kept walking until the sun set when I came by a church. Just then, someone came out of the church. Looking at him, he seemed to be the pastor, so I just ran to him and begged, "Pastor, please help me. I have nowhere to go." At first, the pastor looked bewildered for a moment, but kindly asked about me. I lied. I told him that my mother had passed away and my father beat me every day, so I left home. I told him that I didn't want to go to the child support services. I tried to convince him that I would work hard at the church and would be willing to do any kind of work if he would just let me live there. The pastor first took me to the police station. The policeman asked about me and my home address. I did not answer him because I was afraid the police would contact my dad. Fortunately, the pastor explained my situation to the police, and I ended up at a youth shelter in that area. That's how I ended up living in the youth shelter. The counselor at the shelter enrolled me into a local school, and I was able to start a whole new life. Inwardly, I wondered if I had created a too daring feat, but when I thought about what my dad had done, the fear disappeared in an instant. It didn't take too long to become adjusted to the shelter and new school life. When I got used to them, I felt set free, and it offered many good points. At the shelter, I was surrounded by kids at my age, so it felt as if I came to a fun school retreat, and I was not lonely. That's how I finished the second semester of my 7th grade and began my 8th grade. By that time, I had met a friend, and that's the very friend I had mentioned earlier who became my best friend. She and I were the same age, so we shared the room. At first, both of us were too shy, so we could not even look at each other and just stood awkwardly. It was her who first said hi to me. After exchanging our names, she asked me how I had come to live there. I hesitated a while, but I spoke frankly about my situation. She seemed surprised to hear my story. She told me that her situation was similar to mine. Her father passed away when she was young, and she lived with her mother. One day, she found out her mother was seeing a man. Up to that point, she said it was okay. However, the man her mother was seeing was a married man. My friend was shocked upon learning that. She hated living with her mom, who was a homewrecker living as a mistress. Although my situation was no better, I really felt sorry for her. So, we made a pact to keep our stories secret. From that day on, we became fast friends. At school or in the shelter, we were always together. Because we left home for similar reasons, We identified with each other well with a deeper understanding. We were only 13 years old then, but we decided to lean on each other rather than on our parents. When we were teased at school for living in a shelter, we would gang up to fight against it together. That's how we protected each other. Later, we promised that we would live together upon leaving the shelter when we became of age. In preparation for that, I started working part-time after school. Of course, all my external activities were under the supervision of the shelter's counselor as my legal guardian in case of any problems. 5 years passed, and my friend and I graduated from high school. As my dream was to become a wedding planner, I entered a technical college with a full scholarship. Instead of going to college, my friend got a job as the youngest baker there, after obtaining a baker's license. However, we still didn't have enough money saved to start an independent living. Due to our age, the ability to earn was limited. Fortunately, with the shelter's consideration, we were able to stay at the shelter until we had enough money saved. Thus, we stayed at the shelter for another year and a half and were discharged. At the time, I was still a college student, so due to my meager earnings, my friend had to pay all the rent until I got a job at a wedding shop after graduation. Our living standard improved when I got a job after I graduated from college. We did our best to save our money since we had to live without any help from our parents. I saved everything from my pay after deducting rent, living expenses, and a little pocket money because even if we were to get married someday, we would have nowhere to turn to help us. A college senior introduced me to someone who became my boyfriend during that time. At first, I had no intention of dating him, but I started to open up after his persistence. He is my current husband. After dating for 2 years, my job became stabilized. That's when my boyfriend proposed to me. My friend was so happy for me, and I began preparing for my wedding. But my friend said something unexpected, telling me to call my dad. I was totally against it at first, protesting at her words. But my friend told me to make up with my dad because I may regret it later. We are not young any longer. I think we need to look at the situation from a different perspective now. Her words put me in a dilemma. Ultimately, I decided to meet my dad. My friend said that she was worried about me and accompanied me home. I was deep in thoughts on the way home, with some worries also. I wasn't sure if he still lived in that house. If I saw the happy looks of my dad and that woman, I didn't think I could bear it as in the past. When we finally reached home, I saw my father's name engraved on the nameplate on the front gate. I realized that he was still living there. I rang the doorbell with a trembling hand. A stranger came out and opened the door. She seemed to be the housekeeper. I told her that I was the house owner's daughter. Then she asked, "Oh, are you the daughter who left home 10 years ago?" I nodded my head, and she led us into the house. I saw an elementary school-age child at home. It was the child of my father and the woman. The housekeeper called out to my dad, and soon he came out of the room. As soon as he saw me, he stumbled as if legs had given in. My hands were shaking from recounting that day, but I tried hard to voice out and calmed my dad. "Yes, Alice, our Alice has come home. I am glad you have come back. That's good, really good. At that moment, my thoughts were blank. I still felt that my dad was the one who killed my mom, and I had no intention of forgiving him. I introduced my friend as my roommate. Then, suddenly, I heard a woman scream. When I turned around, I saw that woman was screaming and plopped on the floor. However, she was not looking at me, but at my friend who was standing beside me. My friend also had a frozen white face. The woman ran and hugged my friend, sobbing, and said, "Oh, do you know how long Mom has looked for you, my daughter?" I felt like I was hit in the back of the head for a moment. That woman was her mom, who had an affair with a married man, my father. I couldn't believe it. How could it be? At that moment, my friend coldly pushed her mom away, saying, "Why are you acting like this, lady? I don't have a mother. I don't know you who is a homewrecker like you." At those words, her mom only whimpered and sobbed. My dad was also standing there without saying anything. "Dad, now do you see what you and that woman have done? Can you see what consequences you brought? I'm here today for one reason. I'm getting married soon. I mean to have a happy family, and I'm not going to have a dirty married life that kills my family as you have. I came to tell you that. There'll be no father in my life anymore. I thought it was my duty to at least give you a notice to someone who had me born." I left those words and went out of the house with my friend. My dad anxiously called me from behind, but I didn't look back. My friend's mom staggered, trying to grab her daughter, but my friend coldly slapped her mom's hand, then said, "Hey lady, do you do what? There's an old saying that if you make others cry, you will bleed in your eyes. I see the proof of that by seeing how scumbags like you and that guy end up in life." My friend spoke harsh words to her mother and grabbed my hands to leave. After we came home that day, we cried all night long. We didn't cry because we were sad, but we pitied and felt sorry for each other. When I woke up the next day after crying like that, my head was strangely clear. I felt light, as if a heavy rock that had been pressing against my chest had been lifted. It was the same with my friend. That day, we completely cut off our bond with our parents. No one is born without parents in the world, but I felt it was better not to have any parents for some. I wish that my dad and my friend's mom learned that stabbing someone's heart with a dagger for their selfish happiness will eventually come back to haunt them. It's like the line from a movie. It might be hard to be a human, but don't be a monster. Fortunately, I have good parents-in-law. I was able to erase the sadness of not having a parent that I experienced while living away from home. When my parents-in-law learned of my sad family history, they embraced me warmly to become their daughter. Thanks to them, the wedding was held smoothly, and a few years later I became pregnant with my first child. My friend started to date her colleague in the same bakery not long after I got married. Her boyfriend proposed and now waiting for their wedding. Now you all know why I postponed my pregnancy leave, and I'm so enthusiastic about helping my friend's wedding, right? I was so profoundly wounded at such a young age that I almost couldn't live a life normally. My friend and I cared for each other's wounds to overcome our ordeals together. But even at this moment, I think people are trapped somewhere in a hardship that is difficult for them to bear. I believe you could overcome that ordeal if there is someone by your side to give you strength, because you would be weak to deal with it alone. So, please don't go ignoring the suffering of someone next to you. Even a tiny interest offers a reason to live for someone. I am going to do my best to plan for my friend's wedding so that I could make her be the most beautiful bride in the world. I also plan to live morally with my husband and my soon-to-be-born baby. Thank you for listening to my story. From the bottom of my heart, I hope that you and your family are full of happiness. Everyone, please cheer for me and write your comments of wisdom in the comments section. Pressing like and subscription is a big help to me. Have a nice day.